Then you have the task directory. And the task directory has to do with anything that is task-oriented. As you will know, the OpenE DSS V6 has many tasks that you can create. Tasks with snapshots, tasks with backups, tasks with data replication, tasks with the antivirus. So here is in these logs are the tasks that are created. So here I have a snapshot task, and you can see where it's configured in its time, and I have it for every day of the week. So here you'll be able to view all the task schedules for everything. If you're seeing an issue with tasks, we can go into a file that will all the way down here. We look for tasks. Here's called task.log. Again, once you get familiar with the logs, you can pretty much start being able to navigate around better. So here's all the tasks related for, like I say, I have a snapshot that was scheduled on 9/28, and it looks like it started, and then of course it stopped. Then there's other tasks that will be associated if we scroll down. Here's the data replication. So that would be replicating NAS shares, and here it's showing that the logical volume is 00. It's to start. It's using the snapshot because data replication uses snapshot. So this brings all the information to you to be able to track if there were issues. Here is the volume replication, and it looks like an unknown state, which means it could not see the destination server. So vrep means volume replication. And it looks like the start failed for it. So you could review these and see and dig deeper into certain task logs. System check is just basically when you do the server statistics. So you're able to see information. And here we just do it by a graphical. Whoops, let me put that up here. So instead of looking, we can tell from the instant that we download the logs what I/O stats are for your devices. We can even get to the network interface NICs. So all this information is stored that we can get from memory to load to CPU, so we can see what's going on. So this eliminates you from sending a screenshot. Heartbeat, this is where the auto failover, a lot of information is stored in here. So if you need to find out information concerning the heartbeat with auto failover. And this is the volume groups configuration and lost and found. Currently I don't have any lost and founds or deletes, so they're not going to be presented. Flags is just, simple stuff for your everything from simple network management protocol, what's been enabled, what's not, recent activity, and currently there is none because the sizes are 0. Now we get into information on the www directory. When we went there previously to look at the time, let's look at the hardware setup. Here's my network. What is the server name? Here the server name is called DSS source. A lot of times we'll get tickets and you'll see an error message that there's a duplicate name from when there's more than one DSS server that's implemented in an environment. So we'll see that there'll be duplicate names, and we'll recommend that they change the name. In hardware, we talked about the clock, the power buttons, and then the UPS configuration. This will tell you what's been set up. Currently, I'm not using, it's not on, but I am selecting APC as the mode. Then, of course, there's fiber channel. I don't have a fiber channel QLogic in this system, but if I were, you would be able to see in this configuration file if the QLogic fiber channel HBA is set for initiator mode or target, or actually both initiator and or target because of the ports that are, if there's more than one port on the QLogic. And of course, what RAID information I have. Currently I have an LSI RAID controller, and this is going to tell me that I have access to the RAID controller and the password, and the read-only access is RAID view. So that takes us to the hardware setup. Now if we look at the setup, here it talks about the NAS settings. So the NAS settings, I have information about the authentication setup. Is it a PDC? Is it an ADS? So a lot of times I want to make sure that the customer is properly stating, unless I'm having difficulties, I'm trying to use the LDAP instead of ADS. Here I can verify. I said, well, you're actually using ADS. Please switch to LDAP and then provide this information of what was set for that ADS server and help them out. And this is the synchronization agent, Apple Talk settings, FTP settings. Here you can look at some of the settings to verify if the customer changed the port number and not able to use it. We can verify that through here. GUI information is very limited. There's nothing much in here. It just talks about more of the GUI context of the text and the fonts and so forth. So that's irrelevant information. Administrator setup information, email notification if it's set up. We could see here if it is or if it is not. And of course, administrator password. So a lot of times if you save logs, a lot of times I get customers that the engineer leaves for the week on vacation, but the customer doesn't know how to access the DSS V6. It's helpful that you always save the logs and hold on to them, because then you can access the password and get them here. So if the engineer that's watching on the next, while the other engineer is on vacation, he can at least find out where the logs are and doesn't have to call us or reset the system back to its default. Maintenance is backup, but just on backup devices. It's just tape, Bacula, or backup. So this is very limited information if you had a tape drive. Trees is not important. And that pretty much takes us to ModParam, which is very limited information just on the QLogic controller and logical configuration backup. So this is just storing the configuration of your logical volume. Now we get into some really interesting stuff, is that these are the compressed files of previous historical records that we save. But we want to go to really what is the most important file as an engineer, as an OpenE engineer, or you're as a partner or an end user want to search or searching. First one we usually look at is the critical error logs. And this tells us information immediately what's going on. I could not access my ADS server, so it's providing me with cannot renew Kerberos ticket with the ADS server. So I immediately was able to switch the time, and of course I put it back for our demonstration purposes. But critical error logs provide a lot of information that immediately tells us what could possibly point us in the direction that might be happening to your system. And then once we see that, we really want to, after that, verify what version you're actually running. Since we're not getting any screenshots, we want to let you know this is the file that we verify what version you're running. It's called ancom_v. If I open that up, here I get the information that it's a data storage server V6, and it's build 4786 in 64-bit mode. So this tells us, okay, well maybe possibly you have an issue that maybe you might need to upgrade or not. So we go through this process relatively quick. Now once we say, okay, there's an error, we checked our time, the next thing we want to do is check the D-message logs. This is a very important log information, as this provides the system information. Typically the first portion of this is just usually with the system booting up and the information of the USB hub, power management features, the type of motherboard, NICs, RAID controller, all sorts of information is very valuable. I'm going to scroll down real fast, so I realize a lot of you are just probably going to get a headache from most of this information. But if you just bear with me, I'll show you what we really look for. Here, when I have usually a customer that's having difficulties with, let's say, a RAID controller, the performance, it's just really not there. One of the first things I do is I look at the RAID controller and find out what kind of RAID controller it is. Sometimes I'll even investigate the firmware to make sure that the firmware is up to date. And once I view this, then I'm looking at all the drives and make sure that they are valid. Are they really truly server drives? We do catch them once in a while that we'll see desktop drives in here and they're worried about the performance. And then also, I really preface this big time for all of our customers, is that the right cache is enabled. Now, obviously, you want to make sure that you have a battery backup unit tied into your array controller. And what's important here is that the right cache, when it's enabled, performance improves because you're using the caching capabilities. If not, the right cache is disabled, you're using a write-through, so performance can degrade. So it's worth it to investigate that. Typically, I get engineers that ask me, do I really need a battery backup? Well, a unit attached to the array controller, possibly it's best. It's what the array controller recommends. But if you have a very good UPS system, well, then obviously you can get around it. So as we continue down, so this is some of the information that we're looking at, and this is more of the power management features that you can turn off or on from the motherboard. Now we get into the NICs. Here we start seeing the Intel NICs. So this tells me a little bit more information about what type of NIC you're using. And if you see here, it's ETH0, ETH1. If I have, a lot of times I'll get customers with NICs that are having issues, or we have an issue here. Basically, I was switching things around, and watchdog errors started coming up. This also will tell me what speed I'm running at as well. So a lot of times I'll have customers that actually they're running at 10/100 and they didn't know, due because they were doing something with the switch, and all of a sudden performance drops drastically. So they're not used to getting the 1 gig each speed, and all of a sudden they're dropping down to 12 megs per second if they're lucky. So please be aware when you look for that. That's the kind of things that we look for. And of course, this is the BD that there is a state that is down from my destination server. And this tells us a little bit about the XF file system. These are okay, even on the write fail. But when you see many of these, then there's something that's being very alarming. Something is happening into one of the devices, either the USB flash stick where you've installed DSS V6, or on a 2 gigabit volume. Something could happen. So you want to make sure that it's okay for a couple, but for many of them to fill a page, and that's something to be aware of. If we keep going down, this tells us more about the target information, and this is the SCSI ID that we had in place. And then there was some disconnects in caching that I was playing with, so I can provide you some errors. So that's the D messages, are very important logs to look at. Now I'm going to bring you to one of the other logs that we do look at when we immediately look into a system and start troubleshooting. The test.dat log is really important. It tells us the uptime. It tells us information about the root FS file system, percentage used. If we scroll down, a lot of this we don't really have concern about. So what we really have concern about mostly, if we scroll down, this again tells us the type of RAM disk information, the mounting of the mappers, and if we go all the way down, you'll see then the CPU information. I have caught in several cases where we're listing all the CPUs, and although they tell me it's a quad core, I've seen in cases where I'm not seeing all the cores. So there's either a damaged CPU, maybe they turned off symmetrical multiprocessing. So there's a lot of information that helps us to see if it's actually part of the CPU family here. I realize that there's a lot of information here that you're digesting, but it's just important to notice certain things to point them out to you. Let's scroll all the way down. Of course, this tells us about the system information, about the Intel motherboard that I'm using, the array controller,